Welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast presented by the American Council of Engineering Companies and sponsored by the ACC Retirement Trust. Mergers and acquisitions continues to be a dominant trend in the AEC industry and a popular topic for our podcasts. Today, we're talking with Gary Bowman, Chair and CEO of Bowman, which is headquartered in Reston, Virginia. The firm has more than 900 employees and more than 30 offices around the country. In May of this year, Bowman completed a $53 million initial public offering, and in the ensuing months has completed 4 acquisitions. Gary is here to tell us about those experiences and about his thoughts on the market going forward. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jerry.
So you took your firm public in May, and in recent years, most activity in our industry has been on the private side with private equity and such. Why did you decide to go public?
Well, we had a goal of taking the firm to 100 million and then recapitalizing it in order to have capital for continued growth and some shareholder liquidity. The legacy of our firm is really serving real estate development related projects. Over the past dozen years, we've been very successful in diversifying beyond those markets. But as we became larger and larger, it became imperative that we were able to find some more robust sources of capital to continue and increase our M&A program. So we historically had looked at recapitalizing the firm by private equity. The opportunity was presented to us to take the firm public. It took a good bit of time to study what that meant. But as we compared the public option for us with the private equity option, there were several important aspects to being public that outweighed the private option. For one, we concluded, and this is somewhat counterintuitive, was to me anyway, as a public company, we as the founding leadership team would be better able to retain our independence over day-to-day operating decisions, and as well as have better long-term control over the direction of the destiny of the firm. I'd say equally as important, Jerry, is the ability to use the publicly traded stock as a tool to compensate and attract and retain talent. We have a strong ownership culture, so we saw that as a way to continue and really strengthen our ownership culture. The stock obviously now is liquid. The value is established transparently by market forces. And as a public company, we're actually much more able to have widespread ownership than with other options.
Yeah, that first point, as you say, is kind of counterintuitive, but then when you think about it for a moment, it does make sense. The ownership is more spread out, so you don't have individuals with high number of shares telling you what to do.
So far, we're 6 or 7 months into it. So far, that's proven to be the case. I mean, I'm comparing it to something I haven't experienced, but nothing has changed in our ability to call the shots day to day.
That's great. What about the public offering process? I've often heard that it's kind of difficult and onerous. Did you find that? Were there any eye-opening experiences about it?
It's difficult. I wouldn't say it's onerous. We were fortunate in that the company has 2 senior executives on our team with extensive public company experience. In my view, I think it's pretty ill-advised to take a company public if you don't have high-level leadership with substantial public company experience and has been through the process before. Our CFO led the process, and he had been the CFO at a company several years ago, well, actually probably a dozen years ago, that went public. So he had good public company experience. I'd say, Jerry, the IPO process is really one of the most interesting experiences of my professional life. You need to learn a whole new vocabulary and really a whole different paradigm of viewing what it means to own the firm. It's just a different way of looking at ownership of a public company than of a privately held company. The process is intense. That's the word. I guess the adjective I would use as opposed to onerous. Certainly there were times when it was onerous. But it's as intense as anything I've been involved with. It requires really literally round the clock, 7-day-a-week effort for months. And that was some effort on my part, but especially the leadership team. They're just in here all hours of the day, every day of the week. It's a super expensive project process also. So it's not a decision that you take lightly. Fortunately, our IPO was successful. We have strong demand in the market. We ended up pricing at a level that exceeded our expectations. And it really was a rewarding journey for me, a real learning experience.
I wonder, when you mentioned the two executives who with the experience, did when you brought them in, was their public company experience in the back of your mind?
Bruce Leibovitz, our CFO, he's been with us a dozen years. Really, just his overall broad experience with. At that time, we were viewing more an eventual maybe PE exit. So his experience, he dressed us up over the time he was here to prepare us for to be able to deal with something and present us to the market. So we didn't bring him on with the public company experience. We made an addition to our legal team. We've had a long-term in-house counsel, but we brought on an attorney that had a lot of public company experience as this in-house counsel for publicly traded REIT. So the lawyer that we brought on was right before we went public. So it was with that in mind.
So you went public in May, and since August, you've done 4 acquisitions. I mean, what was that connection? Was that part of the plan to immediately turn around and use some of that funding?
Absolutely. So it's and as we were preparing for the IPO, we looking forward to effectively deploying the capital that we raised. So we started adding a senior staff to build a strong and really highly experienced team to effectuate our M&A strategy. So we have a team dedicated full-time to sourcing and negotiating deals, full-time to due diligence and documenting the deals, and most importantly, we have a full-time team that works on integrating the deals. So we started putting our infrastructure in place even as we were going public. So certainly we prepared ourselves for a robust acquisition pace. As I mentioned before, going public is expensive. Being public is really expensive. So it's really imperative. And we're very small. We're a very small company to go public. So it's imperative that you scale up so that you can absorb those costs of being a public company. So that's one of the reasons that we hit the ground running so hard.
Looking prior to this, I mean, your company is essentially nationwide. Mm-hmm. Those offices that you have around the country, were those M&A or were those more organic?
A little bit of both. We have, I don't know, we probably started acquiring companies 5 years into our existence. So kind of learning, it was an interesting thing to do. Opportunities came along. So we were learning how to do it. Coming out of the recession, one of the things that we committed ourselves to was diversifying the firm, both in markets and geography. So our first acquisition coming out of the recession was actually a small firm in Phoenix. So if we're going to do it, we'll go ahead and do it too. Call it 2.5 time zones away. Which was good because it stretched us. But several of the geographic expansions have been probably more by acquisition, some cold start, and some kind of a hybrid. Some you start out as an acquisition and it ends up you sort of absorb it because it's better to do it as not quite a deal as an acquisition.
So, I mean, since August, four M&A firms. That's pretty hectic. I mean, does that put some strain on the company?
I don't consider it strain on the company because we did prepare for it. We are still building up our entire M&A team, so it's not fully in place. But we went into this with our eyes open. So we went into it, I'll say, with a plan, and knowing what kind of bandwidth it would take to source the deals, to negotiate the deals and document them and to integrate them. So we created that bandwidth, as we went into the process. the the business case made to the investors was really to raise the capital to grow by M&A. So when we raised the capital, no one cashed out. No one candidly was going to invest in the company in the public market so that any of us could ride off into the sunset. Quite the opposite. So here's a war chest. Put it to work, guys.
Okay. What attracted you to these firms? What are you looking for when you're out there?
Well, they all fit into our growth strategy. Some of the key elements of that strategy are to continue our market diversification, like I mentioned kind of at the outset, beyond our legacy market. We have specific focuses in energy transition, all things having to do with energy transition, transportation, and water resources. Also, we have a focus on establishing and growing our building services practice, which is something new for traditionally a civil engineering company. We see that as including MEP, structural engineering, fire protection, commissioning as some of the services that we've already added and adding, and also geographic expansion into robust and attractive markets. So we have, one of the areas, I guess one of the deals we've done is in Denver, Raleigh, North Carolina, Atlanta. Certainly looking hard at Texas and Florida, but there are lots of good geographies for us to either expand into or to build upon our existing presence. When you say energy transition, what is that? So energy transition, it's actually a term that I learned as I was doing this. It's the transition from carbonized to renewable energy. Okay. So photovoltaics, wind, we've been active in the wind market for years. Certainly the need to upgrade the grid to be able to accommodate the renewable energy and transport it from the sources of renewable energies to the points of demand. So it's the renewable energy and decarbonization things. Yeah, that getting wind from West Texas to Boston, that's a challenge. And we are looking at opportunities to I'll say to play in that market of upgrading the grid. We've learned that's going to be a real good source of work over the many years in the future. I would agree. Yes. So when you acquire a firm, is your preference to teach them the Bowman way, or are they allowed some sort of to maintain some sort of independence? Well, how do you work that? Certainly, there's a little bit of both. I'd say more of the latter. We do, and we intend to brand under a unified brand. So we, in all cases, we eventually will fly a Bowman flag. We typically will brand over a period of time, rebrand over a period of time, 6 to 12 months. One of the driving reasons, one of the driving things we look at is top line synergies. So we immediately integrate that portion of the work that introduce the folks from the new firm into the folks in the legacy firm and the other firms that have been recently acquired to start the cross-selling and recognize revenue synergies, which really, even thus far, we've all been very successful at. But the acquired firms operate with a lot of autonomy, and we really like to view it as we don't come into this knowing everything, far from it. So we keep our eyes open to be able to build on our best practices by some of the best practices that the acquired firms bring to us. And typically, do the C-suite people stay, or do they take a payout and leave? Typically stay. Now the deals we've been doing thus far are pretty small, so you don't really say there's a C-suite there. There's certainly founders. There's a CEO. That varies. Sometimes CEOs is the founders are doing it as an exit play, so they have more of a finite time frame. Many times, founders or leaders are doing it in the middle of their career. just looking for opportunities for a platform to continue to grow. Certainly they stay. We don't do this as an expense synergy play, so we don't evaluate how much staff can we cut, therefore how much money can we save. Certainly there are some redundancies in finance and accounting and maybe HR. However, as a firm that's growing so rapidly, more often than not, in almost all the cases, there continues to be a place for, say, finance, accounting, marketing, HR folks to continue on with us. So there's very little, if any, clearing out of the C-suite.
I saw just a couple questions now looking forward. And I know being a publicly held company, you are limited in what you can say about going forward.
Part of the learning experience also.
Yeah, so we'll be careful here. Do you see your M&A continuing apace?
Yeah, so we're happy with our experience so far. Great team sourcing deals, so have a robust pipeline. So I absolutely see us continuing at a pace like this, at a robust pace. As we continue on, the average size of our deals is going to get larger and larger. So the pace of deal by deal by deal will almost by definition get more spread out. But I am optimistic, given what we see out there in the market and the success of our team, that we'll continue to add and probably at even a more robust pace to our top line and diversify. And I'd say, Jerry, just as important, we came into this with a strong history of organic growth. So we're committed to continuing to grow both organically and by M&A. So we're seeing our organic growth continuing at a similar pace to what we've experienced, if not even growing that a bit, because of all the synergies we recognize from acquired firms.
Yeah, I saw on your website that you've averaged 13% for the previous 10 years. That's running a little out of breath, maybe.
It's been out of breath at times.
Yeah.
That's an average over 10 years. So it's for a few years of 30 or 40%, and then flatten off a bit. But
Wow.
it's been a fun ride so far, and this is the most fun it's been right now.
That's great. Yeah, I would guess basically you're bullish on where the industry's going then, if you're doing all this.
Absolutely. This is really a great business to be in. You set aside the intangibles associated with making the world a better place, improving quality of life. Just from a pure business point of view, it's a really attractive industry, attractive business. I think that's why we see so much private equity coming into this. We have, and this is something that we've found as we've grown larger and larger and participate in larger and larger projects, the opportunities for the large scale, long-term contracts with visible and recurring revenue. And the markets that are out there that our industry serves, the infrastructure, certainly the infrastructure bill, the infrastructure thing is going to be out there for really forever. The growth in wireless communication, electric grid modernization that I mentioned earlier, energy transition and renewables, and climate change and water scarcity. They're just a plethora of drivers to continue to create the market for what we do.
Yeah, that's what we're counting on too. So, well,
Sure.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Jerry, thank you very much. It's fun.
Yeah, well, and you've been listening to the Engineering Influence podcast presented by the American Council of Engineering Companies and sponsored by the ACEC Retirement Trust. Thanks for listening.